What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be working on a 2011 Volvo XC60 P3. Today on the XC60 behind me, we're going to be covering how to replace control arms. In front of us, we have one of the many kits available on fcpro.com. This is a Mila HD control arm kit, which includes the arms, some sway bar end links, and all the hardware needed to do this DIY. Typically, these are going to last you anywhere from 60 to 80,000 miles, but that's not to say that they can go to 100 and 100 plus. The vehicle behind us has just over 200,000 miles. And as far as we know, the control arms are original. Getting a little bit clunky up there, a little bit loose, so that's why we're going to be tackling these today. These will be applicable to all your P3 XC60s. But before we get started on this DIY, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. For this job, you're going to need a torque wrench, something that can handle anywhere from 30 Newton meters all the way to 175 Newton meters. We have both a 3/8 drive and a 1/2 inch drive for that today. A large breaker bar. This one's a 25 inch. Arguably a longer one is even better for the style of job that we're doing. We have a 21 millimeter wrench, a couple variants of a 15 millimeter wrench. Those you could probably sub out for a socket and a ratchet, which we're going to have both of just in case. We'll have a small 1/4 inch ratchet that we're going to be using with our 5 millimeter hex to counterhold our sway bar end links. We have a 10 millimeter socket, a 13, a 15, an 18, and a 19 for our lug bolts. You'll see there's a couple extras on here. That's because we have a couple impact ones, a couple 3/8 drive, 1/2 inch drive. This is CTA 3802. That's going to help us with, supposed to help us with the removal of the control arms. So it'll definitely help us with the install. Small flathead screwdriver, a bungee cord, which we'll use with our axle. Small brass punch, which will help us push out our axle. My favorite tool and second favorite tool, big hammer. We have some electric tools. We have Lucamale 508. This is what I like to use on any splines on our axles. And we have a small extension should we need it for the 1/2 inch impact. Not pictured here, but needed is going to be a penetrant of your kind, especially us. We live in New England. A lot of the hardware here is rusty, and it does have 200,000+ miles on it. So I'm sure it's going to fight us a bit to come out. Now with that, let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, we're going to be working on the passenger side. The steps are going to be identical for both the driver and passenger side. So we'll focus on the right side today. We have 5 19 millimeter lug bolts to remove. For those of you without an impact, which I highly suggest you have for this job, you're going to want to break these lug bolts free with the vehicle on the ground first. Use your favorite breaker bar, snap those free, and then you can lift up the vehicle and remove them the rest of the way. All right, now we have the wheel off. We have a better view of where we're going to be working. We have a couple things that we're going to remove from up front here. Just because I have it here already, we're going to start with the axle nut. That's a 13 millimeter. We are going to be replacing this. This is going to allow us to move everything back and forth. We're just going to use the Milwaukee to zap it out. 13 millimeter. And then you can do this now, you can do this later. But basically, we're going to take our brass punch, use that here on the front of the axle, give it a couple taps just to make sure it's going to break free and actually move for us. Otherwise, we're not even going to continue with this job. Perfect. Start moving, no problem. We're going to do this again later as we get ready to pop the axle free from the hub. But for now, we know it moves, so we can set that to the side. Now from here, we have a few more things to do. We can detach our sway bar up top and then also remove some hardware from our fender liner so we can sneak in a view of the top of our control arm hardware. So with that, let's go ahead and work on disconnecting our sway bar end link next. All right, up here we have a 15 millimeter nut with a 5 millimeter hex to counterhold. Keep in mind, if your links have been replaced in the past, you may have a different size piece of hardware or a different style counterhold. For the most part, the locking nuts remain the same. The new Mila HD units also use a 15 locking nut, but they have different counterholds. So now with the 15 broken free slightly, we're just gonna go ahead and use our 5 millimeter hex to counterhold. You can use if you have a pass-through socket set. Now would be a great time to use that. We're just going to use a ratcheting 15 millimeter wrench. We have a smaller one. I think will fit a little bit better for this. And we'll kind of hold with the 5 millimeter hex. Make sure you get that all the way in there. The last thing you want to do is strip this thing out and have to work on finding another creative way to get this annoying little end link out. Even if you're not replacing your end links, you still want to loosen them up from either the strut or the sway bar. It's going to make the removal and especially the installation of the new control arm a lot easier, as the control arm hardware does go through the sway bar bracket hardware as well, or it does both jobs, if you will. Go ahead and pop that out. And we'll get the bottom portion of the end link off once we have the control arm out of the way. It'll give us a ton more room to work with. While I have you up here, we also have two 10mm plastic nuts that hold this fender liner in place. You could just take this one off maybe and fold it back. I'm just gonna undo both so I can kind of hang this off to the side and get it out of our way so we can squeeze a camera in here. But you could probably get away with just the 110. So for that, let's go ahead and zap these two plastic 10mm nuts out. And now we can peel this back. And with that peeled, we can see the two 21mm nuts protruding on either side of the sway bar. Those are gonna be the ones we're gonna counter hold once we're ready to zap the 18mm bolts out. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, the passenger side does have a headlight level sensor arm attached to it. Let me show you where that is first, and we'll get that one off next. So for those of you that have an XC60 equipped with the active bending xenon headlights, you're gonna have this headlight bracket here, which is held in by one 8mm bolt. Let's go ahead and zap this out. Again, this one's only gonna be located on the passenger side if your vehicle is equipped with this feature. Now with that, this arm is free. It's gonna key in on the back of the control arm here. Small little hook. I'll show you that. And there's going to be an opening on our new arm for this to tab into and stay in place. All right, now that we have that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and get the car up a little bit higher so we can get underneath it. And we're going to start by removing the pinch bolt for the ball joint. This is where things are going to get a little bit interesting. It really depends on the kind of condition your vehicle's in. These are 200,000 plus mile, every winter possible ball joints. They're a little bit seized in there. So we're going to try the hook method and try to pop it out with the proper tool first, and if not, we'll pull out my first and second favorite tool, give it a little percussive encouragement, work the control arm out of the subframe, and then we'll finish up with the ball joint. So with that, let's get to it. I'm going to take our 15 on our impact and just zap this bottom pinch bolt out. These are reusable. If yours are a nicer shape, just make sure you clean up the threads and apply a little bit of medium strength thread locker to the threads if you do reuse them. You can see here some of the old factory thread locker. Now, while I have you down there, we're going to go ahead and get our hook tool installed with our pry bar, and we're just going to give it a shot and see if we can break the ball joint out of the pinch bolt here. So the idea of this hook tool is that on each control arm there's a small divot here designed for this hook to sit in, something like so. Then you take your pry bar, which is hopefully longer than ours, feed that through the hole. Just get that braced either on the end of the control arm or the subframe, whichever one you have more length for. In our case, it's going to be the control arm itself. And we're going to use the pry bar just to pry down on the arm. You get the idea. So what we're going to do from here is we're going to work kind of backwards. We're going to go ahead and disconnect the control arm from the subframe side of things. Now we have three 18mm bolts to remove. With that, we're going to pop the control arm out of our subframe and then work the ball joint out. So let's get to it. We're going to take our 18mm on our impact and just zap this bottom bolt out. This one goes into the subframe. There is no counter hold for this 18. With this bolt removed, now we can move to the two 18s down below that we're going to counter hold up top with a 21mm wrench. All right, so before I totally block your view, we're going to show you nice and tight how we go ahead and install the 21mm wrench on either side to counter hold. It's pretty straightforward. A regular box and open wrench and style wrench will get you there with the small curvature at the end. You may be able to fit a socket and ratchet depending on what kind of tools you have, but for us, we found that the wrench works well. And then with that, we're going to go ahead and zap out the 18 from the bottom. And now, using a combination of a pry bar or whatever you may have to pry, we're going to go ahead and pull this lower control arm out from the subframe. It's very important to note that we're going to be pushing our axle out and suspending the axle at the same time. That's going to allow us the freedom to pull this hub assembly out enough to get the control arm off. All right, for this, we're going to go ahead and suspend our axle because I'm working alone. Of course, I can call in somebody to help me. For now, my helper will be this bungee cord. We're just tying it up to the second to last coil. It's really going to depend on the type of bungee cord you have. And then I'm swinging it around the bottom half of the axle. This is going to keep it suspended just enough where it won't fall or put any weird strain on the CV joint on the transmission side of things when we go ahead and fully pop it out, which we're almost there. So with that, we're going to go ahead and drive the front of the shaft through a bit more using our brass punch and our hammer. All right, that's as far as we can go with the hub assembly where it is. So now we're gonna get underneath and work on prying out the control arm from the subframe. You may have to come back and press the axle out a bit more if it's not freeing up once you start freeing the control arm away from the subframe. So just keep that in mind. Now we're just gonna take our pry bar, nothing sexy here, and work on prying this control arm out of the subframe. Now we're gonna work the ball joint end out. But basically what I'm gonna do here is just kind of try working it a little bit on its own, and then we're gonna grab our hammer and just give it a couple taps to start working it down. We're not gonna leave this fully cocked. We're gonna kind of support it a little bit, so we're not gonna whack too hard where we're gonna hurt ourselves. But we just want it not at an awkward angle so it can come out a little bit easier. And boom, there we go, my good people. Here is our 200,000 mile original Volvo control arm. Now we have our arm off, we can go ahead and just clean up the knuckle side of things a little bit. As you can see, our axle is still in place, but we're gonna need a little bit of movement when we go ahead and install our new arm, which is why we undo the axle bolt. This little metal clip here is designed to keep you, my good people, from trying to split this in half like you see on some struts. You don't want to split the back of this with a spreader tool or you will crack it and then you're going to be in a world of hurt. So this is designed to stay in here and keep you and discouraging you from doing that. Sometimes these clips come out with the arms. Just go ahead and pop it around your new ball joint and feed it back on. This one stayed in place, so we're going to go ahead and keep it in place. Just like we did up top, we're going to go ahead and remove the sway bar end link from the bottom. 15mm wrench. All right, the whole thing's spinning. You know what the drill is. 5mm hex. Let's get this baby out of here. We're gonna go ahead and remove the old end link and just install the bottom half of our new one in now. So we can snug that up nicely, and that way we don't have to fight or get too tight with the control arm back in place later. We're gonna take our new Mila HD end link, just kind of feed that up loosely for now. Get this new nut started. I've been pretty lucky with these Mila units. You don't really have to counterhold. They do use a 16mm flat, so you need a thin wrench on the inboard side between the ball joint and the sway bar to counterhold. But in our experience here, usually you can snug these down with just your socket or wrench without having to counterhold anything, which is pretty neato. So we're just gonna go ahead and hold that in place, 15 on our ratchet, just snugged up, and then we're gonna go ahead and torque this down to 70 Newton meters. There we go. We're going to install our arm now, being mindful of the sway bar bracket. You may have to lift up the sway bar a bit, which is why we keep it disconnected, whether you're replacing them or not, from up top to give us a little bit of swing room there. So right now what I'm fighting to kind of get this on a bit is the hub assembly itself, which is why we leave the axle loose so we can swing it back a bit if we need to, out of our way. There we go, sway bar bracket up. What we're gonna do now is line up these bottom bolt holes and get our 18 started. We'll start with the front one, which just goes into the captured nut on the subframe. And then from there, we'll work these back too. We're gonna keep them all loose for now until we get our ball joint in place. Now with that, we can get this side a little bit better lined up. Goes without saying, my good people, you're gonna wanna get an alignment after this job regardless, especially if your old arms were very wasted. Hardware in the back. Again, this one is reusable with the locking nuts, although we do recommend you replace at least the nuts. In this case, we have all new hardware, which is again linked in the description below and also included in the Mila HD kit. All right, so we just lowered the car a bit so I could see up top, line up my bracket a little bit better. Got my 21mm nut up top. I'm just gonna start by hand. This is a locking nut, the new hardware, just like the old one, but the new one's new. So it's only going a couple threads. All right, now with that situated, we're gonna use our CTA hook tool, and that's what we're gonna use to pull our ball joint assembly down and get it lined up with our lower control arm. It's gonna be a little bit of a dance as we're gonna be feeding our ball joint end in while also kind of doing a little dance with our axle here. All right, so at this point, if you haven't already, grease up your splines with a little bit of that Liquid Moly 508 stuff. That stuff's amazing for those. This is where either a second set of hands or your bungee cord come into play. As you get this hub assembly closer, you start feeding your axle in. Beautiful. All right, my good people, we're gonna go ahead and just work this 15mm bolt in with the electric ratchet or by hand first, whichever one you have handy to you. Make sure your ball joint is situated all the way in. And then we're gonna go ahead and torque it down to 110 Newton meters. So we're gonna go ahead and set our torque wrench to 110. And again, just a reminder, you can reuse this pinch bolt. Just be sure you clean the threads and apply a little bit of medium strength thread locker to them. Wonderful, that's what we like to see. And now with that, before we do any of the other small things, let's go ahead and secure the 3 18mm bolts, starting with the one up front that goes into the subframe. That gets torqued to 145 Newton meters, plus an additional 45 degrees. So we're just gonna snug this up using the ratchet first, or the electric impact first, and then we're gonna go ahead and torque it to 145, and then we'll do the additional 45 degrees. There's 145. And there's our 45-degree additional. And now we're gonna do these 2 rear 18mm bolts, counter hold the 21 up top with a wrench, and those get torqued to 175 Newton meters. At some point, the top nut will stop spinning, so you don't have to worry too much about the counter holding, but that's gonna be almost quite literally at the end. Now we're just gonna pop our bracket back over. You'll notice right next to our bracket, you'll see the square cutout for the end of this tab. Just pops into place. And then you slide the bracket forward, line up the hole for your 8mm bolts. This one just gets snugged up. No need to go crazy with it. No more than maybe 8 Newton meters if you're gonna torque it down. Now we can come up, we can button up our fender liner and then reinstall our sway bar end link. All right, we have our top one here. Make sure this bracket is tucked behind the fender liner like it was when you removed it. And it just holds in some of the harness going to our hub assembly. 10mm socket, nice and gentle. They don't get very tight. It's just a little plastic. They're not even full nuts. They're like the thought of a nut. And you can just do that as well if you don't want to tighten it, and that's gonna be good to rock. With that, let's come back up and install our sway bar end link. Feed that through our strut assembly. Get our bracket in place. Get our new 15mm nut started by hand. And same thing as before, we're just gonna snug it up quickly with the electric ratchet. This top one has a little bit of a different torque setting. This one gets a 55 Newton meter torque versus a 70 down below. Here we go. And then all we really have left to do now is install our new axle nut. Make sure your axle's all the way through. And if you haven't already, get rid of your bungee cord or whatever you were using to suspend your axle earlier. New bolt also included with the kit. I'm just gonna go ahead and start that by hand. We're gonna use the electric ratchet with the 13mm on it. We're gonna go nice and gently. This is gonna suck in the axle maybe a little bit more if we didn't get it in all the way by hand. So you don't wanna just ram it into place. All right, that should be the axle bottomed out. We can go ahead, just back that out a little bit. Now we're gonna use a small flathead screwdriver to lock our disc from spinning, just like you would with any axle nut or axle bolt application. In this case, we have an axle bolt, a very small one at that. We're gonna go ahead and set our torque wrench to 35 Newton meters. Give it an initial torque of that, then an additional 90 degrees. So not a whole lot. There's 35, then we'll give it an additional 90. Now we're gonna get our wheel back on and line up our lug bolt holes. Always, always, always get your lug bolts started by hand first. Don't just zap them in with the impact. The last thing you wanna do is ruin your car before you can even go for a test drive after doing all the hard work you just did. Now with the car on the ground, same crisscross pattern. We're gonna torque our lug bolts to 140 Newton meters. All right, my good people, and that is gonna conclude this DIY for today. Overall, not the worst job in the world, not the best control arm DIY either, but definitely one that's doable, and certainly one that's a lot easier with a second pair of hands. So if you have a second buddy that can help you out in the garage, definitely give them a call up, buy them some lunch, buy them some dinner. It makes life a lot easier. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, we're also going to be doing a lot more XC60 content. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks again for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.